Hello, hello. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Saturday morning live stream. I am all blurry. Give me 1 second. There we go. So, what's up, everybody? Today we got a great guest coming on, someone that I admire, that helps out a lot of people here on my channel. It's going to be pretty advanced stuff, so hopefully you guys are prepared for this. As I mentioned in the comments, there will be no giveaway today. Derek is broke, so no giveaways right now. But anyway, without further ado, I'd like to bring in Mr. John Halsey, or better known as SuncrestReefer. Is that right? Did I say it right?
Sun, SuncrestReeef, yes.
SuncrestReeef. That's right. Yes,
Yeah,
Hatfields. I got my Neptune sock on.
I live on a street named Suncrest, and I think I have the only aquarium on my street, so that's where the name came from.
So John, I really appreciate you being here. You are my, I would say my Robin to Batman, but I think you're more Batman and I'm your Robin.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
You have taught me some stuff that I didn't know. You know, when I'm confused, I look towards your helpful stuff, and in the description, I'll put all your links to all your what do we want to call them? Booklets, digital
I call
booklets.
it tutorials.
For those that don't know John, he is an Apex guru, probably more so than I am. He typically John will answer the questions I won't answer because I don't have time on programming. So when you guys put your programming questions in the Facebook group, John's usually right on it. So I really, really appreciate all you do for me and my channel, because without people like you, I probably wouldn't get as many people watching and subscribers because I don't have time to answer all the programming questions, to be honest with you.
Luckily, I'm retired, and so I've got the spare time.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about you, John. How did you get started with reefing, and specifically, how did you get started with programming and Apex?
So it's funny. When I met my wife years ago, she has a PhD in fish biology, and
Oh, wow.
so I had promised her an aquarium as a Christmas gift one year. But at the time, I own a business. I was super busy with work. I didn't really have time to put together an appropriate aquarium after I did the research and realized how much work there is to it. So once I retired 3 years ago, I said, hey, this is the time. I got the aquarium, and she didn't even remember that I had promised her a gift like that years ago. But anyway, I just did a bunch of research, and I have a big background in IT. I'm retired from 30 years of doing IT support. And so I kind of had a technical programming background. And as I looked at the aquarium and discovered the Apex just through my research, I looked into it and decided this looks like a great product to control the tank. So I had probably 8 modules to begin with the day I set out the tank. So I've never actually run an aquarium without an Apex.
Wow.
So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I started from day one with a fairly extensive Apex setup. I'm up to about 15 modules now. And as far as the programming, oh yeah, as far as the Apex programming, it was really just trial and error. You know, I read through the getting started guides. It took a lot of just fiddling with it to really figure it out. And then once I realized that, well, there really isn't there's a comprehensive guide that's many years out of date on Neptune. Right. But once I realized that, well, there really is no, modern programming reference in one place, I started writing these tutorials just for my local aquarium club, and then uploaded them to Reef, and suddenly they became very popular.
Oh yeah.
Last check, I've had somewhere north of 70,000 views across the whole series of articles.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah, I have definitely looked at them. I know a lot of the people on my channel look for me for programming advice, but I can tell you guys that I look to John for programming advice. That's, something, when I have a real interesting conundrum, I look at John's tutorials, and I typically I figure them out. But if there's something really crazy, I might post it. I think I posted one time on Facebook. I'm trying to do something, and you had answered me. I don't remember what it was. And then also for you guys that don't know, John fixed my one of my issues I had. Um,
The backup.
Yep. So I called Neptune. I spoke to Terrence. I spoke to Paul. I spoke to everybody, even Vincent at Neptune, and I said, listen, I cannot save my Apex backup. I've tried everything, and none of them had any idea. John says, just reboot the sucker. So what do? I reboot this, and it works. Like, you guys, I'm telling you, in my line of work, it's always the same thing. If something's not working, just reboot it, and typically it'll fix it. I did not think of that for some reason. I didn't want to reboot my Apex, of course. But yeah, that fixed it.
Yeah.
So
Excellent.
anyway, a lot of people are asking to see your tank, but unfortunately his tank is not ready to go right now. So no tank set up today. Just programming.
I'm about to tear down my tank and disassemble it so I can fit a new sump underneath the cabinet. That's going to take some construction work. So nothing to really show at this point.
Yeah. So if you guys want to see his tank, Terrence had him, I think, on the second or first episode of Control Freak Wednesday, and you had a lot of stuff.
Freak Wednesday. I want to say it was October of 2019, something like that.
Yeah. So go ahead and take a look at that. You can see all these. My favorite thing, John, that you had, honestly, was your float sensors, how you did your float sensors. Oh yeah. My goodness, I love that. So guys, take a look at his float sensors. So let's see. There's a number of questions. We'll get to your guys' questions, but I have my own personal questions for John, and then we'll get to some of them. So one of the big things I want to talk to you about, John, before we get into Apex programming, is everything other than Apex. So you'll notice that I hate the Reef bot. You're kind of new to my channel and you've watched a couple things, but I have had so many problems with my Reef bot. I can't tell you the amount of problems. The app, I have so many problems with it. All of my viewers know all the problems I've had with it. So my question to you is, have you purchased any type of automated testing system? And if so, what do you think? And if not, do you plan on ever buying one?
I have not. The only automation I have is my Trident as far as testing goes. I do have a friend in my local aquarium club who has a Reef bot. He's had, I would say, a love-hate relationship with it. But in general, I think he likes it more than he dislikes it. Based on, he's posted several updates over the past 6 months or so about it. But yeah, I would love to have something to do some more automated testing, especially with nitrate and phosphate. But I don't really have the room inside the cabinet, and I promised my wife I wouldn't have gear strewn across the living room. So for now, I'm just doing the manual tests by hand for nitrate.
Well, you have Well, you guys, he has a Trident. So, and I'm assuming you like the Trident. It works well for you, I presume.
Yep, I actually was lucky to get it on launch night at midnight.
Me too. And same thing.
I've had it running ever since. I think I had one batch of reagents that seemed to be off, and the numbers skyrocketed. But after some testing, and then I swapped out the reagents, it went back to normal. So I literally think it was a bad batch. But other than that, it's been testing great for almost 2 years now.
Yep, and that's what I tell all my viewers too. The amount of headaches I've had with the Reef bot in comparison to Trident, there's no comparison. I mean, the Trident, I had one issue where kind of similar to yours, my calcium was bouncing. So it would go to 300, then 500, 300, and 500. And guys, before I say this, do not do this unless Trident or support tells you to do this, because I got in trouble for this. I cleaned my cuvette, and they say that would fix the precision. That was the problem. I cleaned it. My precision was perfect after that. So again, that was my problem, and I fixed it relatively simple. Just take a Q-tip and cleaned it out. But the Reef bot, it leaked all over the place. Both of them. I have two of them. They both leaked everywhere. One of them actually leaked and shot water because it was out of the peristaltic pump that takes the water, not the tank water, the RO water. So it's a very strong pump, and it squirted out the backside. And I didn't have the lid on because I was repairing it, and it got all over everything and broke 3 of my EB8s
Oh no.
because it didn't
Wow.
shoot. It didn't like leak and like go onto my equipment like everyone has been saying. It literally shot up across the side and went all over everything. So I think we lost the chat. I don't know if you see the chat. Oh, there it goes. Yeah. Um, so I've had a lot of problems with my Reef bot. The app is really quite atrocious. But in other words, you haven't thought of buying a Reef bot at any point, I presume?
I looked at it a year ago, and like I said, I don't really have the space for it, so I haven't really pursued it.
Mastertronic, have you looked into that product at all? Any interest in that?
Yeah, yeah. Again,
Size?
yeah. Some point down the road, I'm hoping to add an addition onto my house and put in a much larger tank with a fish room. At that point,
Awesome.
I will definitely be hitting that stuff. But
Awesome.
for now, I've got my Reefer 425. It's in my living room, and the cabinet space inside is jam packed, and so I just don't want to have stuff outside of that cabinet.
Mhm. So going in the same question line, have you looked ever into GHL, or have you looked ever into Hydros or these other automation systems? And what's your personal opinion on them?
I have actually. I've looked at GHL, and if I can find a used unit, I would love just to buy one just to tinker with. And then, mainly because I hear a lot of great reports about how it's bulletproof, it's more industrial quality of build. And I can see that being really valuable in a saltwater environment. I keep all of my Apex equipment completely on the dry side. There's nothing that is where it can get wet. So I'm really careful about that. But I do know that that's not always an option for people. So I'm curious to see and fiddle with the GHL. But Hydros looks impressive to me. I would definitely like to look into that and get to play around with it a little bit. Just for the fact that it seems like it's less on the text coding, more on the graphic interface.
Yep.
It seems like that would be a lot easier for people that don't really have a coding background.
Yep. And that's kind of how I looked at it too. When I have all 3 of them. The Hydros is really easy to program. I mean, so easy that any reefer can figure it out. And I do like that feature of it. I don't like the feature that it can become expensive if you want to do kind of the same thing Apex wants to do. There's a lot of modules. There's a lot of, in my personal opinion, there's things it's missing that maybe the FMM can provide. There's no Trident, of course, with the Hydros. There's no testing ability. Maybe they'll come out with something, but they do have the Alcatronic interfacing. So there's some things I love about it and some things that I don't really love about it. For you, go ahead.
When they first announced it, I remember asking one of the reps if they were going to come up with a dedicated sense module that has 10 ports on it, all for sensors.
Right.
Because to me, if the number of sensors, float switches, optical sensors I would need so many Hydros modules with all the control ports in addition to the sense ports, but I don't necessarily need that many control ports.
And it would be very expensive. That's kind of what I was trying to get out. A lot of people got mad at me because I said that the Hydros is more expensive than the Apex. And I wasn't really trying to say that, but you kind of reiterated my point. Is it depends on your system. It also depends on what you're doing. If you're having a lot of sensors, which in my case I've lost count of how many sensors I have.
Yeah.
My Hydro system would cost literally 3 times my Apex without question. Some people it won't. Some people it'll cost way less. It just depends on your system.
Right.
For us crazy geeks, it's going to cost us a lot more money. In terms of the GHL, I'm just curious. Did you ever watch my GHL versus Apex series that I did?
No, I haven't seen that one.
Okay.
So
I would
I need to.
encourage you when you have a chance to watch it because I went through all the paces of both the Apex and GHL apples to apples.
Mhm.
Um, and I found that the GHL has a lot of strengths, but one of its weaknesses, which is why I wanted to mention to you, John, is the programming. The programming, even for me, is extremely difficult. Um, and I'm curious if you ever do get a GHL, if you can figure it out like I couldn't. Being a computer programmer, it just struggled so much for me. And again, for people that are GHL fans out there, it comes down to what you're using the system for. So for me, a GHL, if you're just monitoring temperature and pH and you're just turning on a heater, it's very easy. But when you get
Yeah.
into the real complex programming, like me and John do, it's extremely difficult. Um, John, I know where you can buy a used GHL.
Well,
Meet Derek.
I'll, I'll have to take you up on that challenge to see if I can figure it out.
That's kind of where I was going with it. Is I tried. I still have it. It's not plugged in right now. Um, it was like $800, and I don't use it at all. I feel kind of like I wasted my money. But I've reached out to Vinny, who's helped me a lot. But yeah, it's just too much. Let's see. Do you have an I'm not gonna answer that right now. We've kind of been over that already. Okay, so let's get into the fun stuff. So John has a little minor presentation that he's going to start with. I'm interested to see it myself, and I think it's about defer statements, if I'm not mistaken. Which
So, yeah, I mean, I'm going to just go through a couple of common mistakes I see people make, or I guess confusion over how defer works or how it should be used. And I've got a couple of examples. So, do you want to go ahead and share the screen?
Yeah, let me switch over.
Okay. There it is.
Yep, we see it. Apex 101. So John's going to take over. I'm going to take a nap. You guys, no offense. I'm interested to see it. I'm just joking. But yeah, I'm interested to see how you're using defer because defer is a big thing that I see a lot of people screw up on. So
yeah, it's very useful, but you have to be careful with it. So just to start, I'm just going to spend a couple minutes just to make sure everybody's on the same page, just going through how the Apex processes code. I'm sure most of you know this, but just in case anybody doesn't know it, the Apex reads each line of code, it evaluates it, and then the last line that's true is the one that's going to set the output state. So on this particular pump, we've got just 5 commands in the program, and I'm listing the current conditions. So let's assume today is Monday, it's 12:05 p.m., there's no feed mode active. So the Apex starts processing and evaluating these commands. Fallback doesn't apply unless the Apex is offline, so we'll just skip past that one. So the first line, set is always true. Since I said it's 12:05 p.m., this line is true. It's between 12 to 12:59. The day of week command is true. It's Monday, so the first 3, the Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday, Friday, Saturday would make this true. And the feed is not on, so that's false. So after running through this, the Apex chooses the last line that's true is the day of week command, and that tells it to turn the output on.
Right.
So now if we move on to Wednesday, it's now Wednesday at 12:05. Set is still true. The time of day is still true. Day of week is now false because there's no Wednesday. There's no W in those placeholders. There's just the dash in place of Wednesday, and the feed mode is still off. So now the last line that's true is this time, and that turns the pump off. We now move on to Wednesday at 5:15. This time we've also activated a feed mode at a 10-minute feed mode that was clicked at 5:12 p.m. So set is still true. The time is false. The day of week is false, but now the feed line is true. So that again turns the pump off. Now it's 5:25 p.m. The feed mode is no longer active, but it was previously activated at 5:12. So when we get down here to this feed line, it's still within that extra 5-minute delay on feed A005. So it's still true, even though the timer is count down to 0. So the pump still remains off. And then lastly, it's now Wednesday, it's 5:30 p.m. The feed mode's no longer active. And as we go through, the last line that's true is now just the set on at the top, so the pump turns back on.
Mm-hmm.
So just in a nutshell, always remember the placement of your code, the sequence of your code is very important. You could have something that turns it on, but then the line following it is true, it turns it off, and that could mess you up. So just make sure things are in the proper sequence, and that you, as you think through or evaluate it in your own head as you're coding, take all of the conditions into consideration. In this case, you had to consider the day of week, the time of day, and the feed mode before you'd really be able to tell what that output's going to do.
So I'm going to interrupt here. Something important, and I think this goes hand in hand with what you're talking about, is the alarm state. So in my alarm state, how I do it, and I'm assuming you do the same way, I put the most important things at the bottom. So if I have 20 alarm states,
Correct.
I put my leaks all the way at the bottom. I put my pH kind of second, or my temperature near the bottom. So what he's trying to say here, in this particular case, you're going to put whatever is going to happen first, essentially at the bottom, and what you want to provide, true or false. Generally, it's going to be true. Is always going to be the first line of defense, as you can show right there. So the same thing. I'm getting my own self confused. So the same thing with the alarm is I put the most important alarm states, because when I want the alarm to turn on or true, as he's showing, it's the most important thing at the bottom. So hopefully
Exactly.
Everyone understands when you're using alarm states, put what you want to be alerted for. Otherwise, what will happen is you are not going to know that your pH is up while your temperature is up or low, because you didn't put your most important thing at the bottom.
Exactly,
So,
and that's one of the things in my alarms tutorial that you'll find in the links that at Reef to Reef. I spell that out clearly, that yes, you want the most important things last, and if you have two or more things that might be true, whichever of those is listed last is the one you're going to know about.
right.
So yeah, temperature and leaks, definitely. If my two-part is running low, that doesn't matter. That's something that I can wait a day or two. But if my temperature is 100 degrees, I want to know immediately.
Yeah, so I'm going to answer what Lee just said. So, and you tell me if you do it differently. So he's asking, can you show multiple alarms? So how I do it is I have virtual outlets. And what I do is I defer them or I delay them depending on the importance to give me multiple alarms. Again, this is really advanced, Lee, but essentially you could put an outlet for a specific alarm, put another outlet for a specific alarm, and have those delay or defer, so that way you receive them in certain sequences so you know when both of them are on. Again, very advanced, but possible.
Yeah, and that is, in my opinion, probably one of the biggest limitations of the Apex itself, is the ability to only notify of a single alarm state at a time.
Right.
And I'm hoping at some point they re-architect that the alarm structure, but it's been that way since the first generation. So who knows if that'll ever come through.
Yeah, I think if they have the ability to display, I think what you're saying is display which alarms are active simultaneously. That's
Correct.
the most important. Okay, John, all you.
All right, so moving on. So the defer statement. Basically, defer prevents an output from turning on or off for a period of time you specify. So in these examples, defer 1 minute then on, or defer 30 seconds then off. So when the Apex tries to turn on an output, if there's a defer statement, it has to wait for that 1 minute to count down before it's going to actually turn it on. During that minute, all the conditions that were evaluated need to stay in that same state. In other words, if you, and here I'll skip down to the next slide because I have an example. In my ATK tutorial, I use this diagram. So here the water level is being monitored by the ATK low and ATK high sensors. And as we go through the program, it's again set off is always true. In this case, the ATO low is not open, it's closed, so that's false. This is false, and it's the when timer hasn't started yet. So the last line that's true is set off. Now the water level drops below the sensor. So now ATO low open is true, but we start a 10-second defer timer. It has to stay in that same low condition for the full 10 seconds before it will finally turn the output on. So if the water happens to come up before the timer expires, it resets. And so the pump is still off. But then the water level drops, and if it stays below that sensor for over 10 seconds, now the output is finally turned on, the pump turns on, and we can have it refill. Once it closes, or once the water comes back up, the sensor is closed, it turns the pump off, and at this point, the min time 1 hour timer starts. So from while this 60-second timer is counting down, if the water level drops again, it doesn't matter. The output has to wait until that 1 hour has elapsed before it will allow the pump to turn on. So you can see the difference between min time and defer. One is waiting until the sensor has stayed in that state for the full 10 seconds and then finally turn on the output. And the other one is when min time is running, the output cannot be changed regardless of the conditions.
Right. So I'm sure people either left or they're a little confused, but basically I use defers in my system when I don't want to be alerted for a period of time if something has changed within that period of time. That's how I've always looked at defers, and you explained it very well with sensors. Sensors during that period of time are going on and off and on and off and on because water always isn't going to be stagnant. Sometimes it's going to drop a little bit. It could move a little bit. So what a defer basically does is it waits, that sensor basically, it waits till the water has risen above that sensor, so it's moving, and it's always on for more than, in this case, 10 seconds. And once it's been on for 10 seconds, then it alerts. And again, defers are fantastic for a lot of different things, specifically for sensors. I think defers should be used with any sensor you guys are using in water because you do not want your ATO or whatever you're controlling, once it doesn't see water for a millisecond to do something. You want it to give it time before it does something. So So go ahead.
So one of the most common problems that I see people make with defer is thinking that they can use it as a way to sequence a bunch of events. So here's a good example. Someone has their skimmer and they want the skimmer to stay off for 5 minutes if the return pump is off, or once the return pump comes back on, they want the skimmer to stay off for 5 minutes. But then if the sump is high, they want to wait 10 minutes before the skimmer can come back on. And then if they press feed, they want it to wait 20 minutes before the skimmer comes back on. This is not the way defer works. You can only have a single one of these defers for on and a single defer for off on a given output. So that block of code at the top here that has the 3 defers, what the apex is really seeing is what's shown on the bottom. It just uses the last defer that you had in your list. So in this case, every time you try to turn the skimmer on, it's going to wait 20 minutes. It doesn't matter if it was because of the return pump or if it was because the sump was high or because of feed mode. It's always going to wait 20 minutes before the skimmer is going to come on. So just remember, you can't use it as a sort of sequence of events like that.
Or a delay between a macro and programming.
Exactly.
So on this, John, I don't know if you mentioned in the previous slide, can the defer statement be anywhere in the coding?
Yes. Defer is processed after all of the conditions have been evaluated, but it doesn't matter if defer is the first line of the code, if it's in the middle of a block of code, or it's at the bottom of the code. Defer applies after all of the if conditions, set conditions, OSC, any of these that could be turning an output on or off. Once the decision is made which line is the last true statement, that's when the defer finally kicks in.
And that's the same thing with fallback, if I recall. Fallback can be anywhere as well. Is that right?
Exactly. It doesn't matter where it is in the code. It's always going to apply only if the module is disconnected. The generalized or the general standard or the the defaults that most people use is having fallback as your first command and having your defers as the last line of code, but it doesn't matter. It's just more of a common best practice.
It makes it so much easier to understand defer when it's at the end of your statements.
Exactly,
because that's how I do it.
Yeah, correct. So I already went over this. Defer makes you wait until the condition has been consistent, whereas min time makes it stay in that state for a period of time. So what I want to do, last thing I want to go through, and then we can jump out of the slideshow, is here's a great example that I helped a friend named David O'Brien here in my local Reef Club set up what he called a feed storm. He wanted to push a button on his breakout box and have that turn off the main pump for 1 hour. He'll feed his corals, and he wants the MP40 power heads to be off for 30 minutes, and then on for 5 minutes, and then off for 10 minutes, back on for 5 minutes, off for 10 more minutes before everything finally comes back on. And so by using a combination of virtual outputs, min time, and defer, we came up with a program that does this flawlessly. So here is the code. On the left, there are 5 virtual outputs named FeedStorm 1 through FeedStorm 5. On the right are the physical outputs, the pump and the MP40, that are being controlled. So during normal day-to-day operations, the pump is on and the MP40 is on because those set on statements are true. All of the virtual outputs are off because of the initial set off. So now let's walk through the sequence of events. At 5 o'clock, he presses the storm button. That triggers FeedStorm 1 to turn on because of the if storm close and on line. And it also starts the 60-minute min time countdown timer. On the right, you'll see that the pump and the MP40 have now turned off because the last line that's true, it turns those outputs off. We now progress to 5:30 in the afternoon. It's now been 30 minutes since he pushed the button. That means the defer 30 on FeedStorm 2 has finally expired. That allows the FeedStorm 2 virtual output to turn on. That has no effect on the pump because FeedStorm 2 is not referenced in the pump's code, but the MP40, now the last line that's true is the if output FeedStorm 2 equals on, then on. So now we've turned the MP40 back on for that first part of the FeedStorm. We move on to 5:35. The next 5-minute defer has expired on FeedStorm number 3. That turns the MP40 back off. Now at 5:45, the 10-minute defer timer has expired on FeedStorm number 4. That turns the MP40 back on. And then lastly, we get down to FeedStorm 5. Its timer expires. That turns the MP40 back off for the remaining portion of the cycle. And then once we get to 6 o'clock, the min time has expired. So we're back to normal day-to-day operations. The pump is on, the MP40 is on, all the virtual outputs are off. So there you can see we're using defer to sequence these events, but one output is referencing another output, which is referencing another output to make that sequence of events work. So you can't have multiple defers in a single program, but you can stagger them using multiple outlets to achieve the same result.
Yeah, so I wanted to mention this for some of the 200 level guys. If you look where he's got MP40 right there, guys, and under there it says if output FeedStorm 1 through 5, that is how you use virtual outlets within a physical outlet. So you refer to an output by if output FeedStorm. So it's looking at a different outlet. And that's how you can do what we were discussing earlier with the alarms. If you want to have multiple alarms, you have your alarm refer to other virtual outlets. And that's essentially what you're doing there. You're referring to other outlets programming. And I do a ton of this stuff just like you do, John. And again, it's really advanced, but when people are like, Apex can't do this, have them look at this slide. Because it definitely can. It just sometimes it takes a lot of steps to do certain things.
Exactly.
But yeah, that's awesome.
And then the last thing, this is the last slide. One of the things I do frequently to try to conceptualize is I just build a little spreadsheet that lists what I want it to do and kind of walk through the timing of it. So, we have minute 0, minute 5, minute 10 across the top, and then the individual outputs, and you can visualize what's actually going to happen before you build the code. Or if you're in the middle of building the code and you kind of get confused in your head, to me, a visualization really helps to work through it.
Yeah, I do something similar too. So I have a really cool. I think it's cool. Other people are like whatever. I have two tanks. I have two tanks sharing water. Okay, one is in my office, which is sitting right next to me, and one is all the way in my kitchen, 100 feet away, at least. And they share water. And how they do that is I have two peristaltic pumps, one on one tank and one on the other tank. And I've programmed them based on time and based on sensors to every 5 minutes send water between each other every 5 minutes. And there's sensors that tell it when it's high and when it's low. And I did that with a ton of virtual outlets, obviously. But what you just did there is I had to write it all down. And I had to write down, okay, when this is happening at minute 0, do this. At 5, do this. And once I've written everything down in a table, similar to you, I'm able to figure out the programming. So this is really helpful.
Exactly.
Yeah. There's someone that had a programming question, which you might be able to answer right away. Did you have something else? I'm sorry.
That was it. I'm going to exit out of the screen sharing.
Okay. Let me pop you back. Drama D is having an issue with his trident, and I think he's mentioned this on the forum too. Okay, so what his question is I need help with controlled dosing. Specifically, I'll target 8.6. If it falls below 8.2, then alert and enters safe mode above 9 same. I don't know what that means. Do I set up to dose more than actually needed? Did you understand what he's asking?
Could you put the question back up so I can read it again quickly? Sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
So let's see. So the alerting part, yes, I mean, you can add in your alarms or have a virtual output that says if alk x less than or greater than a value, then on. So that can send an alarm. You can also do it actually in the input settings where you can turn on or turn off your alarm values. But as far as having it switch off the automatic dosing, I think I may have read that question the other day. There is no programmatic way for the Apex to stop doing trident controlled dosing. You have to manually go in and clear a checkbox on the dose interval to tell it to stop monitoring the trident and just dose based on the schedule. Right. I'm not sure if that was what the question was referring to.
He had a secondary question, which is turning off the heads. So yes, you can turn off the heads. There's a couple ways you can do it. So the way that I do it is just off. So if you go to the advanced, the gear icon of the dose, there's an advanced section, and you can just program it like any other outlet to turn off, and then it shuts off. Furthermore, if you have your dose hooked up to power and not one link, you can plug that power into an outlet and kill the power to the dose. And that's another way of turning off the heads. To Drama's question, I have no problem with trident controlled dosing. If it's dosing too much, then lower the amount of dose that you're putting in. If it's dosing too little, increase the amount of dose. I don't recommend adjusting the percentages. I think the percentages are good at 40% roughly. I mean, some people have them at 30 and 20, but I think 40 is perfect, at least in my experience. But adjust the amount that you're dosing if it's too high or too low. I hope that makes sense.
And that's the thing that a lot of people seem to think that the trident can control the dosing under all circumstances. It really is just in a narrow range where it's close to what needs to be consumed by your tank. Right. So if you add a bunch of corals, the uptake starts increasing. The trident's not going to be able to keep up with that. You still need to manually adjust the base level to get it close, and then the trident will take care of it from there.
Yeah, I had a sub, and I'm not going to say his name, but I had a sub that constantly was messaging me saying, my alkalinity, I can't get the trident to reach the alkalinity. I have it set at this, and it just won't get there. And I go, well, because you got to dose more. The trident, like you said, it's a plus minus 40% of the value. So if it's not getting enough to even reach the negative 40%, it's never going to reach where it needs to go.
Right.
So that's why there's those two sections there. And Battle had a good point. You could just slide it off. So yeah, Drama D, if you aren't going to be using one of the heads, period, ever, then just slide it to off on the Fusion dashboard. Just instead of auto, just put it to off. Or you can set up the auto to be always off, so that way it's never going to turn on. So that's another thing you
Right.
could do. Let's see. Someone said that they want to have a tutorial on GHL. So trust me, I've tried to find people that know GHL so I could have a tutorial on it, but it's just so difficult to program. I would probably need 3 or 4 hours of a live stream to show people. Speaking of which, I know this is completely off topic, but I know my subs know that I'm into flight simulation. I have a flight simulator, and there's some guys out there doing flight simulator live streams for 11 hours. Like they're literally streaming them flying a plane across the ocean for 11 hours. I'm not even joking. Go on there, guys, and look, and you're going to laugh your ass off. It's just some guy literally can't come up with things to say for 11 hours. I think it's insane.
Wow.
But anyway.
It's like having a long live cam.
Yeah. Oh, it's crazy. Jake, that's awesome, man. Jake says, "Holy crap! I've just figured out what was wrong with my solenoid programming. The defer was wrong." There you go.
My mission is accomplished.
Can you talk? I mean, I know the answer, so this is for my subs, but can you explain when and errors? Because a lot of people, I have to explain whens and errors to them all the time. They think that if they put an error in front of an EB832 outlet, that they're going to know when it's over voltage, when it's under voltage. They're going to get tons of errors, but that's not how it works. So could you go over that briefly?
Right. So the if error command. Let me think of the best way to explain this. Actually, the if error. I'm sorry. I'm getting myself mixed up. The when timer is what I was about to say. The when timer. If an output has been on or has been off beyond the certain amount of time you specify in a when timer, that triggers an error statement or an error condition on the apex. And you can then place the if error line in your email alarm or in any other output to notify you that that condition has been met. So it's it's really only certain modules support the error condition. So for instance, if you use a when timer, it can be used for any output. But for a module like the Trident, the if error will give you warnings when your reagents are low, when your waste container is full, if there's been no test for 24 hours, and so forth. But other modules don't necessarily have an if error feature.
Correct. Well, the FMM is going to. They just told us last week, thank God.
Yeah. It's basically if a module becomes disconnected.
Yeah.
I'm not sure the details behind it yet, but that will be useful to know.
That'll be really useful, specifically for EB832s that get disconnected all of a sudden and people don't know why. Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, like I said, I just wanted you to briefly mention that because I get a lot of questions on that. Someone has a really good question here, and I don't have an answer, so this will be perfect. If there is there some type of setting in Apex to prevent it from occasionally disconnecting to the internet and getting an alert, I presume?
Yeah, if it's disconnecting from the internet, it's typically a problem with, if it's hardwired, it's typically a problem with the network switch, the network cable, or the network jack. It's always possible it's the internet router. A lot of people say, but my Apex won't connect, but everything else in my house is working. Believe it or not, working in IT for 30 years, I've seen many occasions where rebooting an internet router will fix that problem. For whatever reason, it's blocking a specific device on your network from communicating. So that's usually my first course of action, is to reboot the internet router and let that run for a day or two and see if that resolved the problem. Many times it does. As far as alerting, there's really nothing that you can do within Apex code to have it test whether its internet connection is live. There's no ping or anything like that. The heartbeat in Fusion will let you know if it's lost connection, but that takes, what, 30 minutes or so before
the 30-minute timer.
Yeah, and then it doubles and then
Unfortunately,
doubles.
well, it's not unfortunate. That's not the right term. Heartbeat is only internet. So if it loses communication to the Fusion, that doesn't really tell you if you lose connection to your network, for instance, which are two completely different things.
Right.
So, yeah, they should, and I've mentioned this to Terrence, they should have something that alerts you if it loses an IP, if it loses somehow. Whereas Fusion checks if the IP has changed, or, even my printer, when the IP changes, it sends me an alert, you know. What's your take on Apex controlling heaters directly from the plug? Like an
It's
EB8.
never a good practice because something can go wrong. The output can get stuck in the on or off position. The temperature probe might, for whatever reason, fail, and it'll think that the temperature is low when in reality the heater's boiling the tank. So it's always good to have a secondary controller, whether it's a built-in thermostat on a heater or an Inkbird external controller. I tend to like having my Apex be in charge and have the external controller be the fail-safe, mainly because I like to have a tight temperature range. I don't want it fluctuating 1.2 degrees. I like to keep it at 0.3 degrees fluctuation, but that makes the energy bar turn on and turn off more frequently. So there is that concern at some point that'll wear out an outlet. I've had mine running that way for 3 years. It's been working great. I keep a tight temperature range, but yeah, I definitely have a second opinion on the an external controller of some sort to make sure that your temperature probe is accurate.
Yeah, so you brought up a good point, and I mentioned this on, I don't know, my first or second stream. I used to have a calcium reactor on a solenoid, and I used to set in my Apex it at exactly 6.5. And that solenoid would switch off and on constantly, all day long. And my EB8 lasted for 3 years. So, I mean, they're pretty strong. I don't know about the EB8 32s if they'd be able to do that, but I know my EB8 was able to do it. Someone had a good. No, that's not it. Let's see. I'm trying to think. I had a good question, and I can't remember now. Of course. What other questions you guys got while I figure out what I was going to say? Because I don't remember now. Yeah, I don't remember. Anyway. Let's see. Something important too. Oh well. I just lost my train of thought.
Do you get any questions about? I'm sorry.
Redundancies. If you could, maybe your top three redundancies. What would you recommend people have?
So in my tank, the temperature is probably number one. I actually have 2 temperature probes plus my Inkbird, so I'm a little over the top on redundancy for temperature. I like to, on my ATO, actually, I wrote a tutorial on this. I use a float sensor to confirm that my ATO low sensor is actually reading accurately. So if my ATO low is open, my float sensor should also be open. If one says open and one says closed, well, something's wrong. And so I have them both at the exact same water level. And I also use a deferred, so they have to read the same within like a 10-minute time window. So if my ATO low says, yeah, the water level's fine, but the float sensor says, no, the water level's low, and it's been 10 minutes and they still disagree, then it sends me an alert. So we all know optical sensors, they're fairly reliable, but they can get dirty. They can eventually go bad. So I like to have an alternate technology as a failsafe. So using a float sensor is another one for me. Other redundancies, let's see. I keep spare parts of everything critical. I have spare pumps. I actually have a spare Apex.
I have a spare
And
Apex also. I think if you can afford it, I'm not saying everyone go out and run and do this, but
right.
if you can afford it, have an extra brain handy, always.
Yeah, even if it's an older used model, just to get you through in a pinch,
Right.
to me that's important. I do a lot with power monitoring. I have a UPC on my Apex, a UPS on my Apex, a UPS on my internet router. I have a whole house generator on natural gas.
Yeah.
Uh, if I do lose power, there's about a 30-second delay before the generator starts up. The UPS battery keeps the Apex running. It sends me an alert that, hey, there's a power outage. Then the generator kicks in, automatically powers the whole house, and can run practically indefinitely. But the power monitoring and using just even if it's a small UPS backup battery
That's
is
what I have.
really,
Yeah. Even a UPS on just the Apex brain is better than nothing. Like that's what I have. And then of course I have it
yeah.
on
And then
my
selectively,
internet and everything.
yeah, and then you can program the Apex to turn off outlets for heaters and lights and high draw equipment that would drain the battery quickly, and just keep your power
Right.
heads moving.
Right. All right, buttheads, not you, John. These buttheads are getting mad at me. I was called a butthead, so I'm calling them buttheads. Um, we already went over this battle. We already know that he loves Apex more than Hydros and GHL. So we don't need to answer that question. But he did have a good one, and I have an answer as also. What's John's favorite Apex and least favorite Apex piece of equipment?
Um, I honestly think the FMM is my most used component. I use it for flow sensors. I use it for leak detection. I use it for optical sensors. It controls my PMUP. So, if I'd have to rework a lot of things, both in my aquarium, in my sump, and my mixing station, if I didn't have the FMM module. So
Mm-hmm.
to me, that one is so flexible and used frequently. My least favorite is by far the DDR. I have one DDR, and the optical sensors have been swapped out by Neptune support 3 times now because the sensor fails or something goes bad on the circuit board, and you have to send it in for repair. I know for a fact it was never water damage. It was always the sensors that failed,
Yep.
and they've replaced it on warranty. Which even I think the last time it was just outside of the warranty window, and they still replaced it for free. Which kudos to those guys for doing that. But still, that I can't recommend to anyone to buy the DDR.
Yeah, so I'll tell you my quick story about the DDR. I had a DDR, and I didn't know this because I didn't pay attention, but you're not supposed to put alcohol-based
Yep.
liquid in there, and I didn't know that. It started cracking and went all over the place. Um,
I've seen photos of them. They shatter.
and unfortunately, and I got to tell you, there's other containers out there that have no problem with it. So I don't know what they're using that's different. Uh, Honestly, I don't know, but
It's a particular type of acrylic.
yeah.
From what I've heard, acrylic in general shouldn't be used with certain types of alcohol.
Right. But yeah, I've done it with carbon dosing with other containers, specifically
Mhm.
plastic containers, do really well. But there has been a couple acrylics that I've done that haven't had any issues. I don't know what's up with the DDR. Also, with what you just said is really interesting because I don't use DDRs. I use optical sensors off of the dose using I don't know what it is.
DIY.
Yes, and those sensors also fail. So it's not necessarily just the DDR. I think it's something in the dose's output to those sensors that fails. I just don't know.
Interesting.
Because I've had 3 or 4 optical sensors fail that aren't DDR, but it registers it as a DDR, right? So I don't know. I think there's just something inherently wrong with it. I'm going to answer the same question because I'm sure they want to know my opinion. Um, I would say my favorite Apex gear is going to be a toss-up between the FMM and a Trident, and I say that only because when the Trident wasn't available, I was constantly working on my fish tank every night, checking this every night because I'm very OCD. Um, I have I have to check on my fish tank all the time. Once I got the Trident, I can enjoy my fish tank now. So
Hmm.
whether it's working or not isn't the question. It's the fact that it's there that makes it so I don't have to touch the tank,
Yeah.
which is what I wanted with the Reef bot, but that didn't happen. I'm literally tinkering more with the Reef bot and it's flooding than anything in my fish tank, by the way. My least
Yeah,
favorite Apex. Now
I
they've,
would agree that Travis is my second favorite.
I would say, and I had a top 10, by the way. You guys can look at my top 10 Apex gear. But my least favorite has to be the auto feed system, and I'll tell you the reason why. There's two reasons. The first reason is the way that it connects to the tanks isn't very good. Like their connector isn't very good. Um, they did fix this, by the way, so I'm not gonna throw them under the bus. But before, when you would take the container out, the whole thing would spill everywhere. They have they have fixed it, so now you can take the container out without spilling everywhere. Unfortunately, I have the older ones, and of course, it's loud as can be. It's so loud that we're eating dinner and we can hear it, and I'm like, oh, here it goes again, here it goes again. It's a fantastic product
Yeah,
in what it's
I
made
have.
to do, but I don't like it just as a general, as a whole. I wish they can perfect it. There's so many things they can do to make it better.
I have one. I only use it when I'm out of town. I feed frozen food
Okay.
to my fish daily, and then when I'm out of town, I put in the auto feeder, set the program, set it on auto, and walk away.
Yeah. So Rob B asked, "What do you integrate your Apex to your mixing station for?" Um, I don't know exactly what he's saying, but knowing the higher
So,
low, I mean, there's a number of things.
so I have sensors in the optical sensors in both the freshwater and saltwater tank, so I know when they are low. I know when they are high. In particular, for the I have not automated my RODI unit. I still
Mm-hmm.
just manually turn it on and manually turn it off. So I'll turn it on, and 10, 12 hours later, it'll finally fill my storage tank. But of course, I forget about it, and the high sensor gives me an alert. So I walk out in the garage and I turn the valve off. I also have a temperature and salinity probe inside my salt tank. I have a power head inside my salt tank. And so I use
Yeah,
the Apex tube for those.
I do
So
the same thing. Mm-hmm.
at my mixing station, I've got one FMM, a PM2, and an EB4 to power things, and then a dose for my auto water change.
It's exactly the same thing I have, John. The only
Yeah.
difference is I am automating my RO, but it's exactly the same.
Yeah.
Someone asked, "What's your favorite piece of automation for your fish tank?"
Um,
I know it's such a hard question. People ask me that too.
I have to say my skimmate locker. I've got the Avast
Oh yeah.
Davy Jones skimmate locker connected to the Apex. Actually, that and I've got the Swabby, the skimmer neck cleaner from Avast.
Mm-hmm.
I love those two things. I have to empty the locker maybe every 10 to 14 days. And of course, it sends me an alert through the Apex. It turns off the skimmer. Just that's made life a lot easier.
So I hate to tell you, you're gonna get mad, but it's okay. Once you get that platinum sump in there, first of all, you're gonna love your filter roller. That's gonna be your new favorite. But your skimmate locker is not going to fill very often anymore.
Oh,
I
I'm
can tell
sure.
you right now, once I put that filter roller in, I probably haven't removed my skimmate locker once since I've installed it. I mean, seriously, it just
Yeah,
doesn't pull anything anymore.
that's the whole point of why I wanted the roller because I wasn't filtering enough.
Do you heat your salt water in your automatic water change? I do not. I live in Arizona. It's always hot here, but I also have an air conditioned fish room, and it keeps my water 76, 77. So I have no need to do it. What about
Yeah,
you?
I do have a heater in mine. I do keep it. It's in my garage. I live outside of Portland, Oregon. It's about 45 degrees outside right now.
Okay.
So my garage is pretty chilly. I think if the heater were off, I think the temperature usually gets down to about 50 in the garage in the winters. So I just like to keep it relatively close to the tank temperature, as well as it makes it easier when I want to check its salinity if it's close to 78.
Right. So do you have an apex salinity probe in your water mixing station?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
I use a pinpoint. I find that to be a lot more stable in the
Yeah.
mixing station. But yeah, um, I know people want me to mention this, but I got four thumbs down. So John, I don't think someone likes you. Normally I get like two thumbs down unless someone's really messing with me today.
I'll have to work harder.
All right, we're at about an hour, John. And my camera just went out as always. Um, I'll just ask a couple last minute questions, and we'll finish this up. Let's see if anybody has any questions. I'll give them about a minute. Anything else you want to mention out to the subs? Any plugs for anything? Anything?
I
Guys want to send them
read
money? You got your PayPal address?
read my tutorials, because the whole reason I wrote them is I answer the same questions over and over and over in a lot of the forums, and it's a lot easier for me to just simply say, I explained this in my tutorial, here's the link, rather than typing out a paragraph of how to fix the problem.
Right.
So I do hope that those have helped a lot of people, and I will continue to write more as new topics arise. So if anybody has a request on a tutorial topic I have not yet written, let me know.
Yeah, absolutely. He does the exact same thing I do when people ask me questions. Here's a video that I did. Boom.
Yeah,
that's why we do. That's why we do them, man. Rob B, thank you so much for the super chat. I mean, John was going to give you his PayPal, so you guys can just send the money, but I appreciate the super chat nonetheless. Doesn't look like we have many other questions. Mence, auto feeder food is really up to you, man. I use Dainichi. That's my favorite food. I've been using it for 20 years. They're all different sizes, whatever works for you. Smaller pellets, just know if you use smaller pellets, they're going to really broadcast the tank with an AFS. So I always choose larger pellets with an AFS. Thumbs down because no giveaways. Yeah, that's probably why. We probably, no offense to you, John. We had 35-ish people to 40. Normally I have about 60 to 70. I don't know what's going on today. It must have been the giveaway.
Probably.
This is also
everybody knows how to program their Apex, so they didn't need to watch.
They don't need it. They're all geniuses. So, John, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I know we had to schedule. I know I tried to get you last month or something, and we both have been so busy. So I really appreciate it. For those that are out there that are watching, and this is for you too, John, we have a big stream coming, number 50. And I'm not telling you who's going to be on, but you're going to want to be there. It's going to be a really cool stream that I think everyone's going to love. I don't know if it's going to be next week. It might be the weekend after. I'm trying to get all the stuff arranged right now, but number 50, guys, you're going to want to be there. First of all, we're giving away a Trident.
Ooh.
So you're going to want to be there. We got some special guests coming. We got a lot of secrets planned. Let's just put it that way. It could have to do with secret Apex products, possibly being shown off. Possibly.
Wow.
So you guys are going to want to be there. So again, John, I really appreciate you being here, and as always, all your information is so helpful to everybody. And for those that don't thank you enough, I'm going to thank you for them. I really appreciate what you do. So peace, guys. Have a wonderful day, okay?
Thank you for having me on.